Hi, good afternoon. Today I would like to talk about trials and tribulations of sea voyage in the 15th century. Here I will take the example of the sea voyage of Vasco da Gama, his sea voyage to India, the first one. Vasco da Gama with four ships starts from the capital city of Portugal called Lisbon on 8th July 1497. Vasco da Gama had set sail to India for getting trade privileges to trade in India on behalf of the King of Portugal, Manuel I. The ships sail along the Atlantic Ocean, not very close to the coast, in effect in the open sea. After 4 months, they having covered around 7,200 kilometers, they decide to anchor at a point which is to the south of Africa. They anchor near a spot at the south of Africa called Saint Helena Bay, which is around 135 kilometers north of the present day Cape Town of South Africa. About a week after they anchored, they decide to go to the shore, that is the Saint Helena Bay. They do this with an aim to trade. They expected that they would get gold, pearls, and spices from the natives of this place who are called Khoi Khoi. But they were only offered foxtail fans and jewels made of shells. Nevertheless, they conducted the trade and they were on their way back to their ships. While they were on their way back, one of the persons of the crew wanted to stay back for a while because he wanted to know about these people, he wanted to know what they ate and other stuff. The name of this crew member was Fernão Veloso. He told the rest of the crew that they leave him here and send a rowing boat later to pick him up. So initially, the meeting of Fernão Veloso with the tribe was going fine. He had a dinner with them, he had a delicious roasted meal with them, and as soon as the dinner was over, the members of the tribe were pointing him towards the ship, indicating that he should leave their region. But the boat that was intended to pick him up from the St. Helena Bay would take at least 2 hours to come back. Then Fernão decides to follow the tribe to where they're going, despite the protest from the tribe that he leave the place. Meanwhile, Vasco da Gama was on his ship. He had a nice meal of lobster and he was relaxing on his chair. While he was doing this, he also heard some shouts from the shore of the St. Helena Bay. When he looked in that direction, he found that it was Fernão who was waving and calling his crew. Behind Fernão, some of the members of the tribe were gathering and some of the men were also running down a hill towards him. Seeing this state of affairs, two boats were sent towards the shore to rescue Fernão. While this happened, Fernão was now running along the beach, and behind him, the members of the African tribe were in hot pursuit. Some of them were also picking up spears and stones. As he was running along the beach, he found the boats coming to rescue him, and he immediately leapt over one of the boats. And then the boats were leaving the shore. While the boats were leaving the shore, some spears and stones were hurled towards the boats, and this had also injured some of the crew, including Vasco da Gama on his foot. But nevertheless, the boats reached the ships and the rescue was successful. Not only the members of the Khoi Khoi tribe of South Africa, but the seas were also harsh. There were strong winds and waves. If the fleet of ships of Vasco da Gama moved 5 kilometers eastward, they would be pulled back around 10 kilometers westward by these strong winds and waves. Some of the crew members of the ship of Vasco da Gama were terrified by these state of affairs, and they suggested that all of them should return back to Portugal. But Vasco da Gama had other ideas. Vasco da Gama called all his crew members and told them that even he was terrified of drowning. But if they wanted to return to Portugal, it was imperative that all of them collectively give a document to the king stating the reason for their return. Because Vasco da Gama had promised the king that he would sail to India, and this document had to be signed by all the crew members. Saying this, he takes the captain, the pilot, and some of the experienced seamen into his cabin so that they can prepare the document. But on this pretext, he imprisons the pilot, captain, and the seamen. Later, he also takes navigational charts and instruments from the pilot of the ship, who is also captive, and these items he throws it into the sea. He does this in front of the crew members, and he tells them that no captain or pilot or navigational instruments or charts can guide them now, and it can only be God. Without the captain, pilot, and the experienced seamen, and the navigational instruments and the charts, the crew members feared for their survival than the havoc the storm would possibly create to the ships. This kind of a bold behavior from Vasco da Gama had won him their loyalty, because the crew members wanted to survive, and one way they could do it is by following their leader, and the leader in this case did not want to go back to Portugal. After a few days, the sea had calmed down, and now they rounded the southernmost tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, and they went along the east coast of Africa now. From there, they were ready to sail towards India. Until then, in 1488, another Portuguese sailor called Bartolomeu Dias had travelled to the Cape of Good Hope, at the southernmost point of Africa, but he had not travelled further from there to India. It was for the first time that Vasco da Gama and his crew were trying out this route going from the Cape of Good Hope to India. They abandoned one of their ships and reached Calicut on 20 May 1498 in the south of India along the west coast. When they anchored the ships and went ashore, the inhabitants of Calicut were curious to have a sight of the foreigners, the Portuguese, a sight of Vasco da Gama and his 13 officers. They were welcomed by the soldiers of the ruler of Calicut, who is called Zamarin, a title given to ruler of Calicut. The Indian name for the title is Samutri. While the soldiers were taking Vasco da Gama and his officers, they were shooting into the air with their guns to signal the crowd nearby to move out of their path. There were also magicians who played drums and bagpipes. The Portuguese, with such a grand welcome, had also expected a lavish reception at the palace of Zamarin. But what had happened was to the contrary. They were made to wait at the entrance hall of the palace of Zamarin. The day had passed to night, and the Portuguese were still waiting. The Portuguese had lost their patience. Then the Portuguese officers decided to overpower the guards of the palace and enter the room of Zamarin, and this they did. And when they entered the room of Zamarin, despite their aggressive entry, Zamarin welcomed them like brothers. Vasco da Gama saw that Zamarin was sitting on a green velvet sofa, above which was a roof-like structure or something similar to a tent, which is also called a canopy. And the canopy was made of gold. Zamarin was also relaxing on a white fine cushion, and it was something that Vasco da Gama had never seen. Vasco da Gama also observed that Zamarin wore silks embroidered with golden thread. And when the Zamarin smiled, Vasco da Gama observed that his teeth were black because Zamarin was chewing betel nuts. And then there was a golden bowl or a metal container into which Zamarin could spit the fibrous part of the betel nut, or you could say a husk. And the bowl was made of gold, solid gold, a golden spittoon. As I told you, Zamarin had received the Portuguese like his brothers. But when Vasco da Gama talked about the trade privileges they wanted from Zamarin, Zamarin quickly changed the subject. That day had passed and nothing was achieved from the point of view of the Portuguese. They also visited the palace the next day and had unpacked a few gifts that they had brought from Portugal. And these were rolls of striped cloths, strings of coral beads, sugar, honey, hats, and some bowls. And these were gifts meant to be given to Zamorin. Though these gifts would have impressed the Khoikhoi tribe of South Africa, but this did not catch the attention of the wealthy Zamorin. The agents of Zamorin around him were looking at the gifts and were secretly smiling. To be able to hide his difficulty, Vasco da Gama had to lie. And he lied, saying that the gifts that he had brought were his personal gifts to Zamorin. If the Portuguese were given a trade privileges to trade in the region of Calicut, the King of Portugal, Manuel I, would shower the Zamorin with much more priceless gifts. To this, the agents of Zamorin replied to Vasco da Gama, saying that if they had any gifts to give to the Zamorin the next time, it had to be gold. Understanding the situation that Zamorin would not give them any trading privileges, the Portuguese decided to return back to their home. For the Portuguese, it was a disappointing end to their daring and dangerous sea voyage. It only meant that the Portuguese could trade, but they had to pay the custom duty that every other trader had to pay in that region. This way, the Portuguese were able to take some bags of spices back home to Portugal. If strong winds had hindered their movement from Africa while they were making their journey to India, the outgoing journey was also hindered due to the lack of winds. In his eagerness to go back home, Vasco da Gama had ignored the local knowledge of the monsoons. They were returning back from Calicut on August 29, 1498. They were faced with the predicament of the winds and decided to anchor at certain islands of India. After that, they started once again in a bid to cross the Indian Ocean on 3rd October 1498. Here again, the winter monsoon that aided the movement of the ships had not come yet. Hence, going against the winds, it took them 132 days to cross the Indian Ocean. While they were coming to Calicut, it only took them 23 days to cross the Indian Ocean because they were aided by the summer monsoon. More devastatingly, the members of the crew were afflicted by a sea disease called scurvy. It was a disease that caused spongy gums and bleeding underneath the skins. It was not until the 18th century that they knew that the cure for this disease was consumption of fruits rich in vitamin C, like orange. Many of the crew members succumbed to this disease. If they had started off with 170 crew members from Lisbon, Portugal, they entered back to Lisbon with only 55 crew members. And one of the members who died was also the brother of Vasco da Gama. When they arrived close to Lisbon, they were given a grand welcome. A fleet of ships had accompanied them for the last few days in the waters. And after that, they reached Lisbon and anchored there. The King Manuel I congratulated and had also given pension and gifts of land to Vasco da Gama. Such was the importance of finding a sea route to India at that time. Now it made it easy for them to bring large quantities of spices to Portugal. Spices like black pepper, nutmeg, cinnamon, and cloves. And these are items that add aroma and taste to their foods and also act as preservatives to protect food against their winter climatic conditions. What this has done is it had reduced the cost of purchasing the spices by 1504. The cooks of Portugal were able to get 5 nutmegs at the cost of 1 nutmeg 5 years earlier. Before finding this sea route, it was from Venice that the spices were brought by the merchants and sold at high prices in Portugal. Even to Venice, it was imported from India via Egypt. Finally, I would like to once again list out the unpleasant events they had to go through during the sea voyage, incoming as well as outgoing. Firstly, they had encountered a hostile tribes, the Khoikhoi of South Africa. And then they had to face a strong storm near the southern tip of Africa. When they reached Calicut, they would not get any trade privileges because of their inexpensive gifts and the rude behavior shown to Zamorin. Even when they returned, it was because of lack of monsoon. Their ships were getting stuck in the sea. Not only this, but the crew members had also suffered from the disease scurvy, which I have mentioned about during the narration of the story. Despite going through all this, the one big positive they got from the whole voyage was that they were able to discover a new sea route to India.